Welcome to part 2 of our scrolling shooter, which is the 1945 game. Today we're going to add in bullets and enemies and explosions and all kinds of good stuff like that. So let's get going. First thing we're going to do is add a bullet sprite. So click on the add sprite button. We'll call this SPR_BULLET, load sprite, and there it is. Click open. One thing we do need to change on this one is we need to change the origin just like we did with the plane. So I think 16 by 16 will center this up, or close enough to it. And that's fine. Click OK. Next, let's create the bullet object. Create a new object, obj_bullet, and we'll set the sprite to the bullet sprite. The depth is going to remain at 0. That will place it above the islands and the background, but below the plane, which we set at -100, I believe. We're going to add a create event. And when the bullet is created, we're going to set the vertical speed to -8. Remember that when we're working on the y-axis, the up and down axis, y values increase as they move down. We want the bullet to fly from the player's plane up the screen. So it's going to be moving negatively on the y-axis, counting down and moving up. So -8. Click OK. Okay, we're going to add a step event. And we're going to check the y value of the bullet to see if it has left the room. We're going to go to the Control tab, click on the check variable. And the variable we're looking for is the y variable, and we want to see if it is -16 or less, so smaller than -16. That would mean it's beyond the top edge of the room. If that's the case, we're going to go ahead and destroy the instance and make sure it applies to self. Click OK, and that's it for the bullet. Next, we're going to create, we're going to go into the plane object, so double click that. And in here, we're going to go into we're going to add a create event. And we need to control how quickly the plane can fire the bullet. So we don't want the bullet to be a constant stream of ammunition. We want it to be a one shot and then another shot and then another shot sort of periodically. So we're going to set up a timer that controls when the plane is allowed to shoot. We're going to do that by creating our own variable. This will be a local variable, not a global variable. So the plane is the object that holds this variable, and it's going to have a timer associated with it that will count down and reset itself every time we fire. So let's go ahead and move into the create event. What we're going to do is go to the Control tab and grab the set variable, and we'll type in the name of the variable here. We'll call it can_shoot, and we're going to set it to a value of 1. Now, this variable does not exist yet, so when we set a variable called can_shoot, as soon as we try to set that variable, if it doesn't exist, GameMaker will create it for us, and it will be locally attached to the object myPlane. So we'll set that to a value of 1, and then that's it. Next, we're going to add a keyboard event for the space bar, and that's when we're going to fire the bullet. So first we need to check the can_shoot variable to see if they're allowed to shoot. So we go to the test variable, and we're going to test can_shoot to see if it is equal to a value of 1, meaning yes, you can shoot. By the way, in programming, 1 often represents true, 0 often represents false. 1 is true, 0 is false. Okay, if the value is 1, let's grab a block and set this out here. If can_shoot is equal to 1, then we're going to create an instance of the bullet. So here in objects, we're going to create an instance of the bullet, 0, 0, relative to the plane. Remember, the plane set up a 0, 0 origin right in the center of the plane. So that means that the bullet will be created right underneath the center of the plane, and then it'll move forward. So it'll look like it's coming out of the front of the plane. And actually, we want it to appear right in front of the plane. So let's jump back in there for a second. For the y value, let's put in -16. The plane is a size 65 by 60, I think. Anyway, negative 16 will put it right up under the nose there. Okay. Next, we need to reset the can shoot variable to 0. Can underscore shoot to 0. That will mean that the player can't shoot after they fire a bullet. And we're going to create an alarm object. And I don't think we've dealt with those yet. Oh, we did in the clicking of the clown game. We're going to set the alarm to 15. And this will be alarm 0. And then click OK. And that will be the end of this block. So go back to the Control tab and close the block. Next, we need to add an alarm 0 event. So go to Add Event, choose Alarm, and pick alarm 0 from the list. We're going to reset the can shoot variable. Set it to a value of 1. And that means now they can shoot. So after 15 steps, in other words, half a second, now we give them permission to shoot again. Let's click OK. Okay, next we're going to set up a sprite for the enemy plane. And so let's go and add a sprite. And we'll call this SPR underscore enemy1 load sprite. And enemy1 is right there. Click Open. And then we're going to create an object for enemy1. Create object. obj underscore enemy1. And grab the enemy1 sprite. Okay, let's add a create event. First thing we'll do is we'll set the vertical speed to 4. It's going to move down the screen at a speed of 4. Next, we'll add a step event. And what we need to do is check to see if the enemy has left the room and flown down the screen and through the bottom of the screen. And we'll need to jump it back up to the top, just like we did with the islands. So let's go to the Control tab and let's test a variable. And think for a second, which variable you're going to be testing. The plane's moving down the screen, so we want to look at the Y variable. We want to see if it is greater than or larger than a value of 32. And that will mean that the plane has gone, I'm sorry, let's go back and change that. Instead of a set value, we can always check room width or room height. So room height and then plus 32. So that'll be the room height plus 32 would be slightly below the room. Remember that the plane's identity is, its location is set in the top left corner. I don't think we reset the sprite to be in the middle of this one. So anyway, 32 gives us more room beyond just the very edge border. Sometimes, depending on where your origin is set, the plane will fly down and it'll trigger the fact that it's below the room height value when it's halfway off the screen. And if it moves, then it'll disappear and reappear at the top, and that'll look awkward. So we'll just do room height plus 32. It'll give us a little extra room for it to fly off the screen and then disappear out of sight. Click OK. If the Y value is larger than room height, we need to jump the plane to a set position. And the X, we're going to use random room underscore width, so it appears at a random horizontal location across the top of the room. And Y will do negative 16, and that'll make sure it appears above the screen and flies down. All right, that's it for the enemy object for now. Click OK. What we need to do next is add in some sprites for explosions and also some sounds for the explosions. So let's go to the sprites first, and we'll call this SPR underscore explosion1 load sprite and find the explosion1 sprite. Click open. Again, this is a multiple image graphic, so it animates through there. we're going to set the origin on this to 16 and 16, so it's in the center. Otherwise, when our collisions happen, our explosions would happen to the top left of where the collision actually occurred, and that would look strange. All right, go ahead and click OK on that. And then let's add another explosion sprite. We'll call this one explosion2, SPR_explosion2, load sprite. And we'll grab explosion2 from the list. This one's a little bit larger, and so we're going to set the center point at 32 by 32 and click OK. Next, we'll add some explosion sounds, so add sounds right here. SND_explosion1, load sound, and whoops, I'm in the wrong resource folder, so I'm going to go to desktop, my folder, 1945 resources, and there's explosion1. And we'll click OK. And then we'll do that again for explosion2, SND_explosion2, load sound, explosion2. All right, finally, let's set up the objects for explosion1 and explosion2. OBJ_explosion1, and we'll grab the explosion1 sprite. And for this one, explosion1, what we're going to do is we're going to add an event, and we're going to go to the other events and look for animation end. And that means once this explosion has gone through all 6 or so images in its rotation, we want it to stop. If we don't do something, it's going to just repeat itself on a loop and constantly explode over and over and over again. There may be reasons in a game why you would want to do that, but in this case that wouldn't make any sense. So when the animation ends, we want to destroy the instance self. Click OK, and that's it. For explosion 2, we're just going to create the object. We're not going to really do any settings here. So OBJ_explosion2, we'll add the explosion2 sprite, and we'll just leave that alone for now. Okay, let's go back into our enemy1 object, and we need to set up a collision event. So add event, collision, and we're going to add a collision with a bullet. So if the player shoots down the enemy plane, here is what happens. First of all, we're going to play explosion1. Then we're going to destroy the bullet so that it goes away. Otherwise, the bullet would continue to fly out of the explosion and keep on going, and it might have the chance to destroy other planes that may be behind it. Again, that's a situation you may want to do in some game that you create, but in this case, we're not going to do that. So we'll destroy the bullet. Then we will create, we'll play the explosion sound first, then we'll destroy the bullet. Then we'll create the explosion object, and then we'll jump the enemy plane to a new location at the top of the screen so it looks like a new plane is flying on the screen. We won't actually destroy the enemy. And then we'll set the score relative to 5. Okay, so here we go. First step is to create a sound. And the sound that we're going to play is explosion1, and loop should be false. Click OK. Next, let us destroy an instance. So grab the recycle bin there. Destroy other. Okay, and that means of the 2 objects colliding, the enemy plane is self, and the bullet that it's colliding with is other. Click OK. Next, we're going to create an explosion1 object at 0, 0 relative to the collision. So right on top of the collision. Finally, we will jump the enemy object to a new location. And we'll do random room width, again, for the X value up at the top of the screen there, and -16 for Y. Click OK. Finally, let's set the score to a value of 5 relative to the current score. So score goes up by 5. And that will do it for now. Go ahead and close that out. Actually, let's jump back into the enemy object. We need to now create a collision with the player, because if the enemy plane collides with the player, game over. Player's plane explodes, and that's the end of the game. So we're going to add an event, collision with my plane. And here's what we're going to do. First of all, we're going to change the my plane object into an explosion. Okay, sounds kind of strange, but that means the player's plane will no longer exist. It will turn into an explosion 2 object. And then explosion 2 object is going to do some things that will kind of wrap up the game. So it will also play a sound effect, and we'll show the high score and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so here we go. On collision with my plane, we want to change the instance into, change the other instance into explosion 2. Perform events needs to say yes. What that means is when we change it into explosion 2, should the explosion 2 object look at its list of events and then go through all those actions? If we say no, it'll just turn into the explosion and then nothing will happen. But we want it to make sure we go through all the events in the explosion 2 object. So click yes, and then click OK. Next, we're going to play the sound explosion 2, and we're not going to loop it. Click OK. And then we're going to destroy the instance self, which would mean the enemy plane will destroy itself. So we change the other object, which is the player's plane, into explosion 2. Then we play a sound effect, then we destroy the enemy plane. Click OK. Next, we need to go into the explosion 2 object, and here's where we control all the things that kind of wrap up the game. First of all, we add an animation end event. As soon as the animation ends, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to destroy the instance of the explosion 2 so that it isn't visible and it isn't continuing to loop. Next, we're going to sleep for 1,000 milliseconds. Then we'll show the high score, and then we'll restart the game. Okay, so let's go to our destroy instance, and we'll click self. Click OK. Next, we're going to sleep. Oops. For 1,000 milliseconds. Click OK. Then we're going to show the high score table. And then finally, we will restart the game. And that's it for the explosion. Okay, we're almost done. The next thing we need to do is add an invisible controller object to handle all of the enemies flying on the screen and to control the timing of when they appear. This is something that we're going to use in this stage of the game, but later on, in a later tutorial, we're actually going to delete this, and we're not going to use this method to control the enemies. We're going to use a different method. But for right now, this is the method we're going to use to control enemies coming onto the screen. All right, so let's create an object. This is obj underscore controller underscore enemy. No sprite. It's not going to be having any visible qualities. That doesn't mean you should uncheck visible. It just means we're not going to attach a sprite to it. Okay, depth doesn't matter, so we'll leave that alone. Let's add a create event. As soon as this object is created, in other words, as soon as the room starts, we will create an enemy1 object. And we're going to create it at an x of random room underscore width and a y of -16. Click OK. So it'll appear somewhere above the room and fly down the screen. Next, we're going to create an alarm, or we're going to set an alarm. And we'll set the alarm to 200, and we'll call it alarm 0. So 200 steps. Remember, 30 steps a second. So do the math. About 6 seconds or so, if I did that right. Click OK. Next, we need to figure out what happens when alarm 0 goes off. So we go to Add Event, and we choose an alarm 0 event, meaning alarm 0 is going off. What do we do? Well, we create another enemy of an instance of enemy 1. Same thing. For X, we'll do a random room width, and for Y, we'll do -16, and click OK. And then we're going to reset the alarm, and we'll do 500 this time, and click OK. All right, that does it. This stage of the game is finished. Save your work if you haven't done so already, and you can test this game out. Hopefully I haven't left anything off. Okay, move around, fire a bullet. Notice I'm holding the spacebar down, and that's the maximum firing rate that I can do. Oh, well, obviously what is missing is the enemies because I didn't place any enemies in the room. So let's close this out. Let's go to our room, and we'll add an enemy object. Maybe we'll add 2. Now let's play it. Okay, there are enemies flying down. They both disappeared. Oh, they both started up again. Okay, that was one down. Okay, we got him. We're having a little bit of problem with the explosion. The explosion is happening at the top left corner. I'll let you quickly try to figure out what the solution to that should be. And then let me crash and see what happens. Perfect. Game's restarted. Okay, let's think about that for a second. The explosion was happening on the top left corner of the enemy. What do you think is the problem? The problem is the enemy sprite's origin is set to the top left corner. So when we tell the explosion to happen at 0, 0 relative to the enemy, it happens at the top left corner. If we change the origin of the enemy plane sprite to let's see, the sprite is 32 by 32, so 16 by 16, we'll put it right in the middle. Then the explosion will happen in the middle of the plane. Let's try that. And that should wrap up this tutorial. Okay, there we go. Notice that the score is updating in the top of the screen there. And anything else that's kind of weird, like planes being over kind of in this area, half off the screen, we'll address later. That's it for this stage of the tutorial. Stay tuned for episode 3.